On May 19, 2018, the world watched Meghan Markle arrive at St. George's Chapel in a ceremony that was presented as a modern fairy tale. Nearly 65 million viewers witnessed her marriage to Prince Harry, but according to investigative biographer Tom Bauer, that moment was not the beginning of a love story. It was the opening act of something far more calculated. The foundation of every public narrative rests on a single question. Where did the story truly begin? For Meghan Markle, the version presented to the world was simple, almost disarmingly so. During her widely viewed interview with Oprah Winfrey, she stated calmly that she knew very little about the British royal family and had not even researched Prince Harry before meeting him. It was a statement designed to reinforce the idea of spontaneity, of innocence, of a woman who had simply fallen into an extraordinary life by chance. But Tom Bauer's investigation presents a very different starting point, one that begins not in 2016, when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were introduced, but several years earlier. According to Bauer's research, supported by accounts from social contacts, former colleagues, and individuals familiar with London's elite social circles, the groundwork for what he describes as a deliberate social ascent may have started as early as 2013, the year Meghan Markle's first marriage to Trevor Engelson came to an end. In Bauer's reconstruction of events, this period marked a turning point. Rather than retreating from public life, Meghan Markle began positioning herself more deliberately within networks that offered proximity to influence, visibility, and status. Social media activity from that period, along with documented appearances at high-profile venues and gatherings, suggests a growing focus on entering circles that extended far beyond her existing career in television. This is where Bauer introduces what he refers to as Operation Royal, a term he uses to describe a sustained effort to move closer to the highest levels of British society. It is important to understand that this is not presented as a single moment or decision, but as a pattern of behavior, one that, according to his sources, involved careful networking, strategic visibility, and a clear awareness of the kind of connections that could elevate her position. By the time Meghan Markle was introduced to Prince Harry at London's Soho House, Bauer argues that she was not entering that meeting without context. On the contrary, his sources suggest she was already familiar with key aspects of Prince Harry's personality and life experience. Prince Harry, the younger son of King Charles III, had long been regarded as both deeply charismatic and deeply complex. He carried the emotional legacy of the death of his mother, Princess Diana, and had spent years navigating the tension between royal duty and personal independence. According to Bauer, understanding these dynamics would have been essential for anyone seeking to form a meaningful connection with him. His research suggests that Meghan Markle presented herself in a way that aligned closely with Prince Harry's values and emotional priorities, particularly his interest in humanitarian work, global causes, and a life that extended beyond the constraints of royal protocol. To Prince Harry, this alignment may have felt natural, even rare. But Bauer's interpretation is that it was also remarkably precise. He describes it not as coincidence, but as a form of social and emotional calibration, an ability to present exactly what the situation required. The contrast between these two narratives is striking. On one hand, the image of a woman unfamiliar with the royal family, meeting a prince by chance and forming an immediate, genuine connection. On the other, the suggestion of a longer, more deliberate trajectory, in which that meeting represented the culmination of years of positioning and preparation. Social media archives from before 2016 add another layer to this discussion. Posts, photographs, and documented associations indicate that Meghan Markle had a visible and growing interest in British culture, high society, and influential networks. While none of these elements alone prove intent, taken together they form a pattern that challenges the simplicity of the narrative presented during the Oprah interview. Tom Bauer's conclusion is not framed as speculation, but as interpretation based on accumulated evidence. He does not argue that Meghan Markle fabricated her entire story, but rather that she selectively presented it, emphasizing elements that reinforced a particular image while omitting others that suggested a more strategic approach. And this distinction matters, because it reframes not only the beginning of the relationship, but everything that followed. If the story began as a carefully managed progression rather than an unexpected encounter, then the events that unfolded after the royal wedding, the conflicts, the departures, the public revelations, can be viewed through an entirely different lens. In Bauer's telling, Operation Royal was not simply about entering the royal family. It was about navigating, influencing, and ultimately redefining the narrative surrounding that entry. And if that interpretation holds even partially true, then the fairy tale presented to millions of viewers in 2018 was never as spontaneous as it appeared. It was, instead, the result of a process already years in the making. If the origins of the relationship raise questions about intention, then the wedding day itself introduces something even more revealing: symbolism. Because in an institution as deeply rooted in tradition as the British monarchy, almost nothing is accidental. Every detail is considered, every choice is weighed, and every public image carries meaning far beyond what is immediately visible. On May 19, 2018, as Meghan Markle made her way to St. George's Chapel, global attention was fixed on the dress, the ceremony, and the scale of the event. Yet according to Tom Bower, one of the most consequential decisions of that day was not what Meghan Markle wore, but how she arrived. The vehicle in question was the Rolls-Royce Phantom 4, an exceptionally rare car with a history deeply intertwined with the British royal family. Only a limited number of these vehicles were ever produced, and they are traditionally associated with senior members of the monarchy. To the public, it appeared as a fittingly elegant choice for a royal wedding. But within palace circles, the selection carried a far more complex set of associations. According to Bower's research and accounts from royal insiders, the Rolls-Royce Phantom 4 was closely linked to Wallis Simpson, the American divorcee whose relationship with King Edward VIII led to the constitutional crisis of 1936 and ultimately his abdication. That episode remains one of the most sensitive chapters in modern royal history, representing a moment when personal desire collided with institutional stability. For members of the royal household, the memory of Wallis Simpson is not simply historical, it is symbolic. It represents disruption, defiance, and the fragility of the monarchy when confronted with forces it cannot fully control. And this is where Bower's interpretation becomes particularly striking. According to sources cited in his investigation, palace officials had proposed several alternative vehicles for Meghan Markle's arrival, each one appropriate, historically significant, and free from controversial associations. These suggestions were not arbitrary. They reflected an understanding of how symbolism operates within royal events. However, Meghan Markle reportedly declined those options and insisted on the Phantom 4. To an outside observer, this may seem like a minor preference, a personal choice on an important day. But within the context of royal protocol, such decisions are rarely viewed in isolation. Bower argues that the insistence on this specific vehicle was interpreted by some within the palace as a deliberate signal rather than a coincidence. The comparison to Wallis Simpson, whether intended or not, introduced an uncomfortable parallel. Both were American women entering the British royal family under intense public scrutiny. Both were seen, at least by some critics, as figures capable of challenging established norms. And both became associated with moments of institutional tension. It is important to note that Bower does not claim definitive proof of intent. Instead, he presents the interpretation offered by those familiar with the internal dynamics of the palace, individuals who are trained to read meaning into even the smallest details. In that environment, symbolism is not optional, it is foundational. From this perspective, the choice of the Phantom 4 was not simply about aesthetics or tradition. It became, in the eyes of some insiders, an early indication of a different approach to royal life, one that was less concerned with continuity and more willing to challenge precedent. The reaction within palace circles, as described by Bower's sources, was not public but quietly significant. Concerns were raised, not about the car itself, but about what the decision suggested regarding Meghan Markle's understanding of the institution she was entering. Royal protocol is not merely a set of rules. It is a language, and fluency in that language is essential for navigating the expectations placed upon senior members of the family. What made this moment particularly notable is that it occurred before the ceremony had even begun. Before the vows, before the global broadcast, before the formal integration into royal life, there were already indications, subtle but observable, that Meghan Markle's approach might differ from that of those who had come before her. For Queen Elizabeth II, who had spent decades preserving the stability and continuity of the monarchy, such signals would not have gone unnoticed. The Queen's role required an acute awareness of how individual actions could influence the broader perception of the institution. Even seemingly minor choices could carry long-term implications. Bower's analysis suggests that this moment, while overlooked by much of the public, contributed to an early sense of unease within certain parts of the royal household. Not because it caused immediate conflict, but because it hinted at a difference in perspective, one that might later manifest in more visible ways. And that is what makes this detail significant in hindsight. At the time, it was a footnote, a passing image in a day filled with spectacle. But viewed through the lens of subsequent events, it takes on a different meaning. It becomes one of the first instances in which the gap between public perception and internal interpretation begins to emerge. The wedding of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry was presented to the world as a seamless union between tradition and modernity, a moment in which the monarchy appeared to embrace change while maintaining its identity. Yet according to Tom Bauer, beneath that carefully constructed image were early signs of tension, signals that suggested the integration might not be as straightforward as it seemed. In this sense, the Rolls-Royce Phantom 4 was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol, one that carried historical weight and contemporary implications. Whether its selection was intentional or incidental remains a matter of interpretation, but within the context of Bauer's investigation, it represents a moment where perception and reality began to diverge. And as the ceremony moved forward, with millions watching and the narrative of a modern fairy tale firmly in place, those subtle divergences would continue to grow, quietly at first, and then with increasing clarity in the years that followed. If the choice of the Rolls-Royce Phantom 4 suggested a difference in symbolism, what unfolded inside St. George's Chapel raised far more immediate concerns about conduct and expectations. Because while public attention remained fixed on the grandeur of the ceremony, accounts from within the royal household point to a moment that, according to Tom Bauer, revealed a deeper cultural disconnect between Meghan Markle and the institution she was about to join. To understand why this incident matters, it is important to understand what St. George's Chapel represents. This is not simply a wedding venue. It is a consecrated royal chapel with more than 5 centuries of history, a place where monarchs have been laid to rest, where state occasions have been marked, and where the traditions of the British monarchy are preserved with a level of care that borders on reverence. Every aspect of the space, from its architecture to its maintenance, is governed by protocol. According to multiple royal correspondents, including Robert Jobson, and further detailed in Tom Bauer's research, Meghan Markle raised concerns about what she perceived as an unpleasant or musty smell within the chapel in the days leading up to the ceremony. On its own, that observation might not appear unusual. Historic buildings often carry the scent of age, and it would not be unreasonable for someone unfamiliar with such environments to notice it. What transformed this observation into a point of tension was the proposed solution. According to Bauer's sources, Meghan Markle requested that palace staff use commercial air fresheners to alter the scent of the chapel before guests arrived. Specifically, staff were reportedly asked to spray the interior of the chapel to create a more neutral or pleasant atmosphere. Within the context of royal protocol, this request was highly irregular. The preservation of historic royal sites is handled with strict guidelines, and any intervention, no matter how minor it may seem, must align with conservation standards and institutional respect. The idea of introducing artificial fragrances into a centuries-old consecrated space was, according to those familiar with palace operations, immediately problematic. Palace staff, many of whom had spent years maintaining these spaces and understood their significance, declined the request. Their refusal was not an act of defiance, but a reflection of the rules they were bound to uphold. These were professionals tasked with preserving not only the physical integrity of the chapel, but also its symbolic and historical value. What followed, according to accounts cited by Tom Bauer, marked a turning point. Staff described Meghan Markle's reaction as unusually forceful, escalating beyond a simple disagreement into what some characterized as a visible display of frustration. While the exact tone and wording remain subject to interpretation, the consistent element across multiple accounts is that the interaction left a lasting impression on those involved. Bauer's interpretation of this moment is direct. He does not describe it as a minor disagreement or a case of wedding day nerves. Instead, he frames it as an early indication of a fundamentally different approach to authority and environment. In his assessment, Meghan Markle viewed the chapel primarily through a contemporary lens, one in which spaces are adapted to meet personal standards, rather than through the institutional lens that governs royal properties. This distinction is critical. Within the monarchy, locations such as St. George's Chapel are not simply settings. They are extensions of history, bound by continuity and tradition. Altering them, even in subtle ways, is not treated lightly. For palace staff, the request may have signaled not just a misunderstanding, but a lack of alignment with the principles that define royal operations. The impact of this incident, as described by Bauer, extended beyond the immediate disagreement. It contributed to an emerging pattern in which staff began to reassess their working dynamic with Meghan Markle. Reports from that period indicate increasing pressure within the household, with some staff members describing a demanding environment characterized by high expectations and limited flexibility. It is in this context that the term staff turnover begins to appear more frequently in discussions of the early Sussex period. While it would be inaccurate to attribute all departures to a single incident, Bauer suggests that moments like the chapel disagreement played a role in shaping the broader atmosphere. They were, in effect, early signals of a working relationship that would become increasingly strained. Another layer to this situation is the contrast between public perception and internal experience. To the millions watching the ceremony, the wedding appeared seamless, carefully orchestrated, and emotionally resonant. There was no visible indication of tension, no suggestion that anything behind the scenes had deviated from expectation. The image presented was one of unity and celebration. Yet according to Bauer's research, the reality within the palace was more complex. The chapel incident, while not publicly acknowledged at the time, became part of an internal narrative about compatibility, about whether Meghan Markle's approach to environment, authority, and collaboration aligned with the long-established culture of the royal household. This divergence between image and experience is a recurring theme in Bauer's work. He argues that many of the conflicts that later became public were not sudden developments, but the result of patterns that had been visible, at least internally, from the very beginning. It is also worth noting that institutions like the British monarchy operate on continuity. Change is not impossible, but it is typically gradual, negotiated, and carefully integrated. Sudden shifts, particularly those that challenge established norms, can create friction, not necessarily because they are wrong, but because they disrupt a system that depends on stability. In this case, the chapel incident can be seen as one of the earliest examples of that friction. It was not a crisis, and it did not alter the course of the wedding itself. But it introduced a question that would become increasingly relevant in the years that followed. Could Meghan Markle adapt to the expectations of the institution, or would the institution be expected to adapt to her? According to Tom Bauer, the answer to that question began to take shape in moments like this, quietly, behind the scenes, long before the public narrative began to shift. And as the ceremony concluded, with the world still captivated by what it believed to be a seamless union, those early signs of misalignment remained largely invisible. But within the palace, they had already been noted, discussed, and remembered. If the early tensions around symbolism and protocol suggested a difference in approach, the next moment during the wedding introduced something far more revealing about control over narrative. Because one of the most widely celebrated images from May 19, 2018, the image that was framed globally as a powerful statement of independence, was Meghan Markle walking alone down the first half of the aisle inside St. George's Chapel. At the time, that moment was interpreted as modern, even historic. Commentators described it as a feminist gesture, a departure from tradition that reflected a new kind of royal bride. The image was simple but effective, a woman entering one of the most traditional institutions in the world on her own terms, without being given away, without relying on convention. It was widely praised, and it became one of the defining visuals of the entire ceremony. However, according to Tom Bauer, the reality behind that moment was considerably more complex, and far more calculated than it appeared. Because the decision for Meghan Markle to walk alone was not spontaneous, nor was it purely symbolic in the way it was presented. It was, by multiple accounts, a deliberate and carefully planned choice, one that cannot be separated from the circumstances surrounding her family at the time. Just days before the wedding, it had been confirmed that her father, Thomas Markle, would not be attending. The public explanation centered on health concerns and media pressure, a situation that quickly became one of the most discussed pre-wedding developments. Yet Bauer's research suggests that the absence of Thomas Markle was not simply an unfortunate situation, but part of a broader pattern in how relationships were being managed in the lead-up to the ceremony. In that context, the decision to walk alone takes on a different meaning. It was not only a statement of independence, but also a reframing of the narrative. Without her father present, the traditional structure of the aisle walk could not be followed in its usual form. By choosing to walk alone for the first portion, Meghan Markle transformed a potential gap into a defining moment, one that placed her at the center of the story rather than at the center of a complication. The second half of the walk, in which she was joined by King Charles III, then the Prince of Wales, was presented as an act of generosity on his part, a gesture of support extended to someone entering the family under unusual circumstances. And to the public, that is exactly how it appeared: dignified, gracious, and seamless. But according to Bauer and accounts from individuals familiar with the rehearsal and coordination process, there were moments during the walk that did not align with the composed image that was broadcast to millions. One such detail involves an interaction with a royal aide who attempted to assist with positioning and movement during the entrance. According to these accounts, the assistance was not welcomed, and the aid was dismissed in a manner that some witnesses later described as abrupt. It is important to approach such details carefully, because they rely on interpretation and perspective. What one observer may view as assertiveness, another may perceive as dismissiveness. However, in Bauer's analysis, this moment is not isolated. It is presented as part of a broader pattern in which control over presentation and environment was maintained with a high degree of precision, even in situations where collaboration would typically be expected. The distinction between perception and reality becomes particularly significant here. To the global audience, the aisle walk was flawless. It conveyed confidence, independence, and composure. There was no indication of tension, no suggestion that anything behind the scenes required adjustment or intervention. The narrative was complete the moment it was seen. Yet internally, according to Bauer's sources, the same moment contributed to ongoing discussions about working relationships and expectations. Royal events of this scale involve extensive coordination, with teams responsible for ensuring that every movement aligns with both protocol and timing. When that coordination is disrupted, even briefly, it becomes noticeable to those involved, even if it remains invisible to the public. Bauer's interpretation of the aisle walk is therefore not focused on the image itself, but on what it represents within a larger framework. He argues that it reflects a consistent approach in which narrative control is prioritized, and in which public meaning is carefully shaped, even when the underlying circumstances are more complicated. This interpretation aligns with his broader argument that many of the defining moments of the Sussex wedding were not simply organic expressions of personality, but constructed elements of a larger narrative strategy. In this case, the narrative was one of independence and strength, delivered through a visual that required no explanation and invited no immediate scrutiny. The effectiveness of that strategy is difficult to dispute. The image of Meghan Markle walking alone became one of the most widely circulated and discussed moments of the entire event. It reinforced the idea that the monarchy was evolving, that it was capable of incorporating new values and perspectives. It was, in many ways, exactly what a global audience wanted to see. But Bauer's analysis invites a different question, not whether the image was powerful, but whether it was also carefully engineered. Because if it was, then it serves as another example of the gap between presentation and process, a gap that becomes increasingly important when evaluating what followed in the years after the wedding. As with the earlier incidents, the significance of this moment was not immediately apparent. At the time, it was celebrated, shared, and accepted as part of a larger story of renewal within the monarchy. It did not generate controversy, and it did not disrupt the overall narrative of the day. However, when viewed in retrospect, and placed alongside other accounts from the same period, it begins to take on a different role. It becomes part of a sequence of events that, according to Tom Bauer, illustrate a consistent pattern: the shaping of perception, the management of narrative, and the careful construction of an image that would resonate far beyond the walls of St. George's Chapel. And as the ceremony continued, with every detail broadcast to a global audience, that image remained intact, precise, compelling, and largely unquestioned. But beneath it, according to those who observed more than what the cameras captured, the dynamics at play were already more complex than they appeared. As the public narrative surrounding the wedding continued to solidify, one claim would later emerge that, according to Tom Bauer, fundamentally challenged the credibility of the story being told. This was not a matter of interpretation or symbolism, but a matter of verifiable fact, one that would eventually require direct clarification from one of the most senior figures in the Church of England. During the highly publicized interview with Oprah Winfrey, Meghan Markle made a statement that immediately captured global attention. She claimed that she and Prince Harry had, in effect, been married 3 days before the official ceremony on May 19, 2018. According to her account, the event witnessed by millions around the world was not their real wedding, but rather a public spectacle arranged for the institution. The true exchange of vows, she suggested, had taken place privately in their garden, in a moment that belonged solely to them. At first glance, the claim appeared to reinforce a familiar theme: the idea that the couple had been navigating the pressures of royal life while trying to preserve something authentic and personal. It aligned with the broader narrative of tension between private intention and public obligation. However, the implications of the statement were significant, because marriage within the Church of England is not a symbolic act. It is a legal and religious process governed by strict rules. The response came from Justin Welby, the very individual who had officiated the wedding at St. George's Chapel. Speaking with measured clarity, He stated that the only legal and recognized marriage between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry took place on May 19, 2018. Any prior exchange of vows, he explained, would not constitute a formal marriage under church or civil law. His clarification was careful in tone, but unequivocal in substance. This created an immediate contradiction between a public claim and an authoritative correction. In response, representatives for the Sussexes adjusted the wording of the original statement, reframing the earlier event as a private exchange of vows rather than a legally binding ceremony. The shift was subtle but important, moving the claim from a factual assertion to a more symbolic interpretation. For Tom Bauer, the significance of this episode lies not only in the discrepancy itself, but in what it reveals about narrative construction. He argues that the original statement was designed to achieve a specific effect, to separate the emotional reality of the relationship from the institutional framework of the wedding. By suggesting that the real marriage occurred privately, the public ceremony could be reframed as something imposed, something external, rather than something fully embraced. This interpretation becomes more striking when placed alongside accounts of the wedding planning process. According to Bauer's research and reporting from royal correspondence, Meghan Markle was actively involved in shaping the details of the ceremony, from aesthetic decisions to structural elements. The event was not something that simply happened around her. It was something in which she played a central role. The contrast between these two positions, deep involvement in the planning of a major royal event, followed by a suggestion that the event itself was not the real wedding, forms the basis of Bauer's critique. He does not frame it as a simple misstatement, but as part of a broader pattern in which narratives are adjusted after the fact to align with a desired image. This pattern, in his view, reflects a form of real-time legacy management. Statements are not merely reflections of past events. They are tools used to shape how those events are remembered and understood. In this case, the goal appears to have been to emphasize authenticity and personal connection while distancing the couple from the institutional weight of the monarchy. The reaction to the Archbishop's clarification also highlights an important dynamic within the royal system. Figures such as Justin Welby operate within structures that prioritize accuracy and continuity. When a statement conflicts with established fact, it cannot simply be ignored. It must be addressed, even if the correction is delivered with diplomatic restraint. For observers, this moment introduced a new level of scrutiny. Unlike earlier controversies, which could be interpreted through competing perspectives, this was an issue where documentation and protocol provided a clear reference point. The timeline of the wedding, the legal requirements of marriage, and the role of the officiating authority were all matters of record. In that sense, the episode became a turning point in how claims were evaluated. It demonstrated that certain narratives, when tested against verifiable information, could not be sustained in their original form. And once that threshold is crossed, it inevitably raises broader questions about consistency and credibility. Bauer's analysis suggests that this was one of the most consequential moments in the evolution of the Sussex narrative. Not because it generated immediate conflict, but because it introduced a measurable gap between statement and record. That gap, once visible, becomes difficult to ignore. As the years progressed, additional claims, interviews, and public statements would continue to shape the perception of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's relationship with the royal family. Each new development would be interpreted in light of what had come before, with increasing attention to detail and consistency. In retrospect, the question is not simply whether the original statement was accurate or not. The more significant question is what it reveals about the process by which public narratives are formed, adjusted, and defended. Because in a landscape where perception often moves faster than verification, the ability to shape a story can be as influential as the events themselves. And this is where Tom Bauer's work positions itself, not as a source of isolated revelations, but as an attempt to assemble a coherent picture from fragments that were always available, but not always connected. By placing statements alongside records, and narratives alongside timelines, he invites a reassessment of what was accepted at face value. As of 2026, the broader context has shifted considerably. Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, have taken on increasingly prominent roles within the monarchy, while the Sussexes have established a life outside the institutional framework they once represented. The distance between those two trajectories has become more pronounced over time. What remains constant, however, is the role of narrative. The story that began in 2018 as a widely celebrated union has evolved into something far more complex, shaped by competing interpretations, public statements, and ongoing analysis. Whether one accepts Tom Bower's conclusions in full or in part, his work underscores a central idea: that the truth of any high-profile story is rarely contained in a single moment, but emerges gradually through comparison, contradiction, and context. And that brings us to the present moment. The wedding that captivated millions is no longer viewed solely through the lens of celebration. It is also examined as the starting point of a sequence of events that continues to unfold, influencing how both individuals and institutions are perceived on the global stage. If you found this breakdown valuable, consider subscribing for more detailed analysis on royal narratives, public figures, and the stories behind the headlines. And as always, the most important question remains open. Do you believe the version of events that was presented to the world, or has the evidence changed how you see it?